Hello, my name is Joseph Kabulleta, and I'm here to talk to you about an economic civil war that has been raging on in this country for the last 35 years. Now, we all know about civil war, and some of us lived through it throughout the period of the 80s and before that. But when it ended, at least for the most part of this country, we were plunged into a different kind of civil war that is of an economic nature. Now, the economic civil war does not have casualties in the form of dead bodies lying in Luwero or in northern Uganda or in Soroti or anywhere else, but in form of dead dreams that have been frozen and mummified in the minds and the hearts of 40 million Ugandans. So it kind of started as a Cold War throughout the 90s when the privatization process was riddled with what some people called corruption, but which in fact was looting, as resources that previously belonged to the nation were passed on to individuals and their families. And I call it a Cold War because it was done quietly and outside of the gaze of a majority of Ugandans, and that's because this government still cared about public opinion. But when they ceased to care about public opinion and descended deeper and deeper into tyranny, what was previously looting became a plunder, and then ultimately they became completely entitled in their minds to every resource in this country. And now it ceased to be a Cold War and it became a brazen conflict, pitting on the one hand a group of people who are so small they can fit in one room, who believe that they're entitled to everything that this country has, and I'll call them the Indomitables. And on the other hand, a bigger group of almost the rest of Ugandans who they feel do not have an entitlement to anything and who are just supposed to survive at best. And I'll call those the space fillers. Now, the only reason the space fillers own anything, be it a business, a piece of land, or property, is because it hasn't yet caught the fancy of the Indomitables. Now, if it does, they will be given a diminished price for it and be forced to sell. That's if they are lucky. If they are unlucky, it might just be taken completely. So because they are land grabbers, they are business grabbers, they can grab anything, and now they do it brazenly and they don't care about public opinion. They ceased to do that about 15 or perhaps 20 years ago. So when you see headlines like this, for instance, this one ran in January of 2016, saying that Museveni spends 27 billion shillings on campaigns in just 2 months. Of course, that was just a month before the general elections in that year. And then you see another one 2 months later, in March after the election, saying that Bank of Uganda has been hit by fraud of the same amount of money, 27 billion. Now, of course, we know who the thieves are, and they don't care if we know. Previously, they did when they still cared about public opinion. Now they don't care. All that matters is that there was a fraud here, and we all know where the money went. Or when you see something like this, 181 billion shillings loan has been taken from the World Bank to fight locusts. And then not long afterwards, court awards the same amount of money, 181 billion, to an unknown, nondescript company owned by some pastor for the same amount of money, 181 billion. So then you know where the money that came from the World Bank loan went, and everybody can see it. It is in open view. They no longer care. About 1 year ago, I wrote a rant about oil and how crude oil was being siphoned out from the oil wells in Hoima and Pakwach and transported in trucks and taken and sold as crude. Now, I came under a lot of criticism for that particular writing, and I was attacked as somebody who didn't know what I was talking about, from people in the oil sector, from the regime apologists and their surrogates. And one of the biggest things they told me is it's not commercially viable to transport crude oil all those distances and go and sell it that way. But then not long after, Kenya comes up and dismantles that argument because they show that they are selling their crude oil and actually making a good profit out of it. And then now, they discover their oil 10 years after Uganda, and they have been selling it and making some money out of it. But then some people would want to believe that we are just sitting on ours and we dare not sell it as crude. You really have to be a special kind of stupid to believe that, especially when you realize that the trucks which have been transporting the Kenyan crude oil look something like this. And then you also realize that the people in Hoima have been seeing trucks that look like this coming for so many years from the oil wells in Butiaba region and passing through the Hoima town and going God knows where. And so you really have to believe that perhaps they are carrying sewage or something like that, but we all know what they are carrying. And we all know that we have been selling crude for so many years. And then you also discover that world websites such as this one, worldexports.com, list Uganda as 91st in the world for crude oil exports. So then you wonder, where is the crude oil that Uganda has been exporting, since the oil in Hoima and somewhere is somehow frozen in the ground, waiting for true exploration. The truth, though, is we have been selling crude. It's not supposed to be known by the space feeders. That is for the exclusivity of the Indomitables. Now then you look at headlines like this, 700 billion oil fund spent quietly, and that came out of the Daily Monitor. Then you look at another headline which actually came out of government sources, talking about how a lot of money is being lost through oil contracts and things like that. So every time you see that the government is losing money, and you just see the government is losing money, it's not the government losing money, it's the space feeders losing money, and it's the Indomitables scoring a goal, and they continue to score goals after goal after goal, and the space feeders are just now spectators. We are supposed to be opponents in one way, but now we've been turned into spectators. And then there is the issue of gold, which now is our biggest export earner, because last year Uganda earned $1.25 billion from gold exports. Almost all of them exclusively, about 99.9, went to the United Arab Emirates. And that is double from what was the previous year, which was about $513 million. So now, when you see this, then you realize that there is very little tax paid off gold exports. Why? Indomitables. There is very little of accountability of all the $1.52 billion in as far as